Welcome to the Corinne True Center for Baha'i History. The center was established by the National Spiritual Assembly of the Baha'is of the United States in January of 2024. Its purpose is to foster the study of Baha'i history, Baha'i sacred texts, Baha'i philosophical and theological concepts, and world religions from a Baha'i and comparative perspective. I am Robert Stockman, director of the center. Today, joining me is Gisu Muhajir, a member of the Corinne True Center's executive committee. She's the founder of our book club and runs it every month. She's also involved in teaching the center's courses on Shoghi Effendi's writings. She will run the Q&A part of our program today. Also joining me is Ann Gordon Perry, who is a member of the Baha'i Faith and an academic who has been part of the Baha'i community for over 45 years. She holds a PhD in aesthetic studies and teaches art, appreciation, and humanities at Dallas College. A passionate artist and writer, and I can confirm that from all of the times I've watched her give presentations, actually. She co-created the documentary films Luminous Journey, Al-Baha in America, 1912, and Al-Baha in France with her husband, Tim Perry. He has had a deep interest in subjects like Sarah Farmer and Green Acre, the earliest Baha'i center of education in the United States. Anne was the primary author and editor of the book Green Acre on the Piscataqua, and has published articles and books about Sarah Farmer and Green Acre history. We will draw on that experience particularly today. So Anne, thank you so much for joining us. We are delighted that we finally have been able to get you and your PowerPoint up at once, which for some reason proved very difficult, but we have succeeded. And I will now turn off my camera and microphone and turn the stage over to you so that we can just hear you and we will hear your program and your presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rob and Gisu, for this opportunity to share something that's dear to all of our hearts. So I've known Rob since the late 1970s when we met at Green Acre, and I've marveled at what he's done with both the Wilmette Institute, and the Corinne True Center, not to mention his own books and scholarship. I'd also like to acknowledge a few others who are here or may be here today. Robert Sapiro, the current director of Green Acre, who has contributed insights and information for my talk. Catherine Hogensen, who has provided inspiration and information. Frank Robinson, who has especially promoted the arts and race unity at Green Acre. Roseanne Adams, who's been invaluable as an archivist and friend. Jonathan Menon, who is working on a biography of Sarah Farmer and sent me some newspaper clippings late last night. Glenn Egley, whose beautiful photographs are included. Betty Fisher, who taught me the fundamentals of book publication. Jeff Albert, who has fostered inclusivity and the arts at Green Acre. Bob Atkinson, who introduced me to Sarah Farmer and Green Acre. And my husband, Tim Perry, who helped me make a film about Sarah Farmer, which is on YouTube. And many others who have helped in research and writing. And those of you who haven't been and served Green Acre, and those of you who have been there, may I share what I share today inspire all of you. Okay, with that preface, here's my PowerPoint. So two people are significantly interwoven in the history of Green Acre. One is Sarah Farmer and the other Abdul Baha, the son of the founder of the Baha'i Faith. Green Acre was created by the former and confirmed and blessed by the latter. And it is through their efforts and relationship, it became one of the most unique places on earth. So Rob and I, as he mentioned, worked together and with others on Green Acre on the Piscataqua, which has gone through 3 editions, and much of the history I'll share comes from that source. By the way, Green Acre sits on land once occupied by Abenaki indigenous people, and the Piscataqua River means meeting of the waters, or sometimes river of light, which are both fitting descriptions of diverse people coming together for inspiration through Green Acre. Now for a truncated version of Green Acre history. So Sarah Farmer was born in Dover, New Hampshire, and spent much of her growing up years in Salem, Massachusetts. She grew up in a household of love, compassion, faith, and freedom. Her mother, Hannah, was a humanitarian and philanthropist. Her father, Moses, an inventor who invented the electric light bulb when Thomas Edison was only 12 years old, and he also invented the first electric car, but he did not patent most of his inventions. Sarah and her parents knew reformers such as Sojourner Truth, Harriet Beecher Stowe, both of whom came to their home to visit. They also knew Harriet Tubman, Julia Ward Howe, and other progressive leaders. With the combination of a belief in transcendentalism and abolitionism and their understanding of the needs of the time, the urge to help those in need was strong, and they were courageous. Their home was a station on the Underground Railroad. Sarah spent her teenage years in Salem. She was smart and well-liked, and at graduation served as the valedictorian of her high school. A schoolmate said of her, she was a brilliant conversationalist, always taking the lead and delving into everything, vivacious, the center of the group, having radiance, friendly with everyone, not given to feminine vanities, in leisure time preferring the study of languages to sewing or knitting. During her adolescence, Sarah had one long illness that gave the family reason to give up a college education for her, but she continued her studies with the help of tutors. From her youngest days, she participated in adult discussions on far-ranging topics. Sarah helped her father in his work and learned several foreign languages, particularly German. She also pursued romantic literature, especially the poetry of Tennyson, and religious philosophy. She had her beginnings in Dover, New Hampshire, but her mother was from Eliot, Maine. The family moved to Eliot in 1881 after living in Salem, Massachusetts, and Newport, Rhode Island, where Moses held prestigious positions. They moved to the Eliot countryside because of health concerns and built a home called Bittersweet, as they felt bitter to be leaving the busy intellectual life of Newport, but sweet to be in a tranquil and beautiful spot. Moses continued his scientific and electrical work. Hannah created Rosemary, a home for underprivileged women and their children, and helped to save Boston's Old North Church from being torn down. Always interested in books and reading, Sarah revived the Eliot Library Association in 1887, which had been founded 5 years earlier but had become inactive. She served as secretary of the association, and you can find framed minutes in her handwriting in the Fogg homestead adjacent to the library. She organized evenings of readings and discussion on the classics of American and British literature, spoke in churches to raise funds for the public library, and the poet, the poet John Greenleaf Whittier was a family friend, and she persuaded him to donate an entire collection of books. During 2 summers, Sarah organized special events called fetes, which include music, a bazaar, a cafe, and foreign costumes. She had the artist Arthur Dow draw and design the invitations. She was creating a cultural element in the town of Eliot that hadn't been present before. Today, in a room of Eliot's William Fogg Library that is dedicated to Sarah, a beautiful portrait of Sarah and her dog Barry hangs over the mantel. And here you can see me when I presented a monologue there at the library as Sarah. In 1889, 4 men, Martin Tobey, George Hammond, Dr. John L. M. Willis, and Francis Keefe, formed the Eliot Hotel Company to begin planning the building of a resort hotel in Eliot. On March 1st, 1890, Sarah signed an agreement to become the 5th partner in the venture. Originally, the inn they built was called the Eliot Hotel, but an early brochure calls it Greenacre. Sarah adopted Greenacre on the Piscataqua as the official name for the inn, but it was later shortened to the Greenacre Inn, and today it is called the Sarah Farmer Inn. In 1892, Sarah had a vision of Greenacre as a place where various philosophies and religions could find expression. Since her partners felt frustrated that the inn was not bringing enough visitors, they decided to allow Sarah to experiment with her ideas for a school for comparative religion. This decision was to have major consequences for Greenacre's future. In March 1893, Moses and Sarah went to Chicago to exhibit some of his inventions at the World's Columbian Exposition, also known as the Chicago World's Fair. Unfortunately, while there, Moses became ill with pneumonia and died there. Sarah, deep in grief, returned to Eliot. A few months later, a Parliament of the World's Religions was held in Chicago as part of the Columbian Exposition, the first formal gathering of people representing various Eastern and Western spiritual traditions. Knowing she might meet some interesting people to invite to the Greenacre conferences, Sarah returned to Chicago just after the closing of the Parliament. She met with its organizers, Charles Bonney, and invited Vivekananda, a Hindu from Calcutta, and Dharamapala, a Buddhist from Ceylon, now Sri Lanka, to speak at Greenacre on a universal platform for the comparative study of religious systems. That following summer, in 1894, under a tent banked by fragrant pines, Sarah dedicated Greenacre to the ideals of peace and religious unity. Then she had the first known peace flag in the world raised and explained. In looking for an emblem, we wanted something that would be a call to everybody and fit everybody. And we felt that the message that had been brought to the world by prophet after prophet was the message of peace. So we put a large banner over our heads, peace. By the way, the peace flag was 36 feet long and flew on a flagpole made of two ships' masts that was 85 feet tall. So it could be seen from neighboring towns in 2 different states. The current one is much smaller, which you can see. As a young woman, Sarah had suitors, educational and cultural advantages, and an inquiring mind. It's not known why she never married, though she was engaged to Francis Keith for a time, and some of her business partners in the Elliott Hotel were in love with her. I think she felt a tremendous interest and responsibility in helping her father with his inventions, in caring for her parents when they were elderly, and in nurturing Greenacre. Sarah's cousin, Helen Green, remembers, she was very beautiful, regal. Her voice was most attractive, gentle, expressive, yet convincing. Her dress was distinctive, individualistic. She dressed in a Quaker gray veil and kerchief, and wore also white dresses. Personality very charming. With her radiance, she got what she went after because of her charm and personality. No one could ever say no to her. She expressed to people great love. She was a gentle person, kindness personified. She had a beautiful Persian cat, also a dog. She was a tireless worker, night and day, always kept a pad and pencil beside her bed. She loved children. She always said that Greenacre was her child. Never did I hear any members of my family say one thing in criticism of the perfection and moral uprightness of her character. Now, author and educator Stanwood Cobb said, Sarah J. Farmer was a genius, along a line unfortunately all too rare in human nature. She was a spiritual genius. Call her saint or seer, as you will. She was something of both. And the writer Horace Holly summed up Sarah's place in American history. He said, a consecrated pioneer to make a definite and practical application of ideals hitherto existing only in the minds of philosophers and the lives of saints, Miss Farmer can be considered as the feminine counterpart of Ralph Waldo Emerson, for she possessed his idealism to the full, but her nature was executive, practical, and intensely human, desiring tangible results above abstract formulas and definitions. To this woman, the spiritual legacy left by Miss Farmer in Greenacre represent a truly astonishing achievement. To this woman of pure New England stock must be credited the glory of founding the first universal platform in America. So from women's rights and racial unity to religious tolerance and peace, Sarah's work epitomized the progressive forces welling up in America. As Douglas Martin wrote, no other resource available to the early Baha'is was comparable to the Greenacre Forum. There is no evidence that any other influential believer had the range of interests and background that Sarah brought to the faith. In 1903, an article in the Boston Sunday Journal stated, "Years ago, intellectual Boston would have gone out to Concord for spiritual regeneration at the feet of the good, sweet poets and philosophers who lived there. Today, the inner circle of intellectual Boston goes to Greenacre to sit at the feet of the gentle and wonderful prophetess, priestess, Sarah J. Farmer." And of course, the papers of the day were full of news about her. So we know that she was an astonishing personality and force in her day, and that according to eyewitness accounts, Abdu'l-Baha said she will be revered above all American women someday, and that she will become the envy of the queens of all regions and will be the rival of all the celebrated people of the world. So now a bit about her relationship to Abdu'l-Baha and why he may have made these statements about her. Shoghi Effendi, guardian of the Baha'i faith, identified 19 individuals as the disciples of Abdu'l-Baha. Sarah was among them. Thornton Chase, the first Baha'i in America, as Rob knows, was also in the group, as was Robert Turner, the first African-American Baha'i in America, and Harry Randall, who rescued Greenacre before Greenacre came under the auspices of the National Spiritual Assembly. Now, we don't know how exactly Sarah first heard of the faith, but she knew Phoebe Hearst in the 1890s, and that they became Baha'is independent of each other. But according to both Bahia Winkler and Earl Redman, in January 1900, Mariah P. Wilson from the Boston area and Sarah Farmer from Greenacre boarded the SS Durst Bismarck for the Mediterranean Sea in Egypt. Sarah discovered two friends, Josephine Locke and Elizabeth Knudsen, also on the ship. Sarah soon noticed that her two friends were reading a book on deck, which they quickly would conceal whenever anyone approached them. They finally revealed what they were reading, The Hidden Words by Baha'u'llah. After reading what was in the book, Sarah immediately wanted to visit Abdu'l-Baha. She and Mariah cabled for permission to visit, and it was granted. When the four women reached Egypt, they met some of the Baha'is living there, including Mirza Abul Fazl, which allowed them to learn more about the faith. They arrived in Haifa on 22 March, and the next day took a carriage to Acre. They were not impressed with the ancient town as they passed through stench and confusion of the narrow street. But then they entered the courtyard of the master's house and saw him at the top of the steps, and immediately forgot everything else. That night, Sarah wrote in her diary, "Heart too full for speech, received by our Lord." Sarah Farmer had many questions that she hoped Abdu'l-Baha would answer. To ensure that she didn't forget any of them, she wrote down 15 questions on paper and placed the sheet in her Bible. When Abdu'l-Baha called for her at 5 the next morning, she dashed off for her interview without her Bible, and therefore without the questions. When she was seated before him, the master turned to the interpreter and said, "Tell Miss Farmer that this is the answer to her first question." The interpreter was surprised because no question had been asked. Abdu'l-Baha then proceeded to answer each question in order until unable to restrain her emotions. Miss Farmer burst into tears of happiness. Though exhilarated, she returned to her room to regain her composure before she could listen to the answers to the rest of her questions. So just a note, Abdu'l-Baha told her that superstitions and superstitious beliefs should be discarded at Greenacre. So I don't have time to go into this, but there's a poem that I also don't have time to read, but it's full of the isms that Greenacre in its early days encompassed, spooks and goblins and so forth. So you can read that in the book. So along with confirming her vision for Greenacre at their meeting, Abdu'l-Baha began a correspondence with Sarah that was a lifeline for her. 28 tablets to her are published in Tablets of Abdu'l-Baha. One of the things he wrote to her was this: "O maidservant of God, know verily I was with you in spirit during your assemblage in the meeting under the standard of peace, And I perceived ye with my spirit on the mount of salvation, and shared with ye in celebrating the praise of my Lord. So it was extraordinary, the spiritual bond that they shared and how he could commune with her from such a distance. He also wrote, thy heart is connected with the callings of the kingdom of El-Abha, so that thou hast dispensed with the wires of the world, because the terminal of the spiritual wire reached the center of thy heart, and the other is placed in the spiritual center, vibrating information constantly through the power of the Spirit and successively conveying the glad tidings. Sarah also corresponded with others by letter in the Holy Land and elsewhere. Dr. Younes Afrukte, in Memories of 9 Years in Acre, notes, one such correspondent who seemed to live in a trance-like state of dreams and spiritual discovery was none other than Amatullah Miss Sarah Farmer, the founder of Greenacre Bahá'í School. Many of her visions and prognostications came true. Her approach to the discovery and understanding of truth, her method of reasoning, and her logical arguments not only closely resembled those of the early Babis, but also served to elucidate their many mystical and obscure concepts. So one of Abdu'l-Bahá's tablets to Sarah Farmer was particularly significant in light of the social justice work and conversations we're having today. In a conversation with a man from South Africa in London in 1911, Abdu'l-Bahá said, Baha'u'llah once compared the colored people to the black pupil of the eye, surrounded by the white. In this black pupil is seen the reflection of that which is before it, and through it the light of the Spirit shineth forth. There are various contexts in which Abdu'l-Bahá used this metaphor, such as correspondence and conversations with early believers, including Robert Turner, the first African-American believer. But here's an interesting aspect of these references. It was to Sarah Farmer in 1902 that Abdu'l-Bahá wrote the first known reference to the pupil of the eye. As to Robert Turner, Alice Ashton, and Louise Washington, verily the faces of these are as the pupil of the eye. Although the pupil is created black, yet it is a source of light. I hope God will make these black ones the glory of the white ones, and as the depositing of the lights of love of God. And I ask God to assist them in all circumstances, that they may be encompassed with the favors of their loving Lord throughout centuries and ages. So as we contemplate the evidence of Sarah's commitment to racial unity, we can see how Abdu'l-Bahá had found a receptive hearer of his message. How very important and precious is this unity and the vision they both held of the future of Greenacre. Abdu'l-Bahá was appalled at the racial prejudice in America. Blackness and whiteness, he said, do not matter. True judgment is in the heart and soul. And we can be proud that Sarah understood this message and worked for racial unity in her day and received the first message with the pupil of the eye analogy. And of course, she invited diverse people to Greenacre. So another issue of great concern to Sarah was that of peace. In 1904, a war raged between Japan and Russia, and in August that year, a rousing program at Greenacre included the great operatic singer Emma Thursby in Japanese costume, singing the national anthem of Japan, followed by Mary Burnham Moore leading the audience in the national anthem of Russia. All stood as they sang with a hope for peace. A year later, Portsmouth, New Hampshire was selected. A few miles from Greenacre, where the peace flag was visible, was selected by President Theodore Roosevelt, who invited the delegates from Russia and Japan to consult at the Portsmouth Naval Shipyard. Always at the forefront of efforts to achieve peace, Sarah invited the peace delegates and President Roosevelt to Greenacre for a special victory celebration. After the news, that the treaty was to be signed at the Portsmouth Naval Shipyard. Roosevelt sent a kind letter of regret, and the Russian diplomat Witte also declined on behalf of his entourage. And here on this map, you can see the relationship of Greenacre to Portsmouth and the Naval Shipyard, and the little flag visible above the inn that was quite visible from the shipyard where the delegates conferred. On August 31st, 1905, the Japanese peace envoys arrived at Greenacre. In a letter to his wife, Ali Kuli Khan wrote, "Yesterday at Greenacre, the Japanese ambassador and myself first addressed an audience of over 300 people on peace. There were a few others besides Miss Farmer on the platform, and each spoke for a few minutes. Yesterday was the most important day Greenacre has had in her whole history, and it was a day of rejoicing indeed." Sarah obtained a pass to the Portsmouth Naval Shipyard on the day of the signing of the treaty. She was the only woman known to witness the historic event. Alice Toby Cummings wrote this account. Sarah Farmer went to the Portsmouth Naval Yard and asked to be witness to the signing of the treaty. She was not allowed to do so. An Elliott man by the name of Alfonso Staples saw Miss Farmer and went down and invited her up to his office, where he pushed the table up to the window and had Miss Farmer stand on it and look across to the room where the envoys were and saw the peace treaty signed. And I did discover that his office was in the adjoining building, so she had to stand on a table looking out across the way into that room. And there's a wonderful article that summarizes that whole thing. I don't have time to tell you about it, but no doubt Sarah felt her efforts to promote peace had in some way contributed to that historic moment. And an article published in the Portsmouth Herald notes, Miss Farmer's deep interest in universal peace made her most anxious to witness the signing of the treaty, and she visited the building where the treaty was signed, but she met an official whom she knew, and through his efforts, he placed her, etc. So she became the only woman in the world to witness that solemn transaction. So now I don't have time to tell you the story of how Sarah dealt with many difficulties during her leadership of Greenacre, how various groups and individuals resisted the Baha'i message she brought back, how she suffered from ill health, and how well-meaning friends placed her in a sanatorium, and how she had been away from Greenacre for 3 years when Abdu'l-Baha arrived in America. He brought her back to her beloved Greenacre, and there are precious images of Sarah with Abdu'l-Baha in a motor car, and the kiss he gave her on the cheek. And I think it's the only photo we have of Abdu'l-Baha kissing anyone. In the Greenacre book, there are details about Abdu'l-Baha's time at Greenacre and how he went with her up to the Portsmouth Naval Shipyard and to Montserrat. Sarah, let's see. Okay, Ivy Drew Edwards recalls that she and 3 others, including Sarah, went on a carriage ride with the master. He said it was important that Sarah Farmer visualize the great university her efforts had made possible, twice pointing out certain trees to Sarah. When we were almost at the top of the hill, Abdu'l-Baha took Miss Farmer's hands in his and said very loudly, "This is hallowed ground, made so by your vision and sacrifice. Always remember this is hallowed ground, which I am pointing out to you." Abdu'l-Baha said to all of us, "This is where the first Baha'i university will be built." Then he said, pointing to a spot in the center of the area, "This is where the second Baha'i temple in the United States will be raised." In reality, all this has been built and is right now ready to become a material reality whenever the Supreme Concourse finds mankind purified enough to bring about its consummation. Then he turned to Miss Farmer and said, "You will be revered above all American women one fine day. You will see." And I might mention that this property of Montserrat is not on the main Greenacre campus. It's about 2.5 miles away in Elliott, and to this point, undeveloped. Okay, Alfred Love recalled, "We can never forget the master's prophetic saying when he stood on Mount Savat and definitely pointed to the spot where the second Majlis al-Azkar in America would be built, and beside it the great institution of learning. These projects, he said, were ordained matters. And that is the picture of the gathering that day with Abdu'l-Baha on Mount Salwat. Harry Randall also described this experience. Oh, I'm behind a slide, I guess. Okay. He went to the top of Mount Salwat, and he told us that on this spot a great Mashriq al-Asghar would be built, and that the whole hill would be covered with institutions of learning, science, and religion. And he said already it had been created, and it was not a prophecy alone, and the Mashriq al-Asghar hung low over that place. He also told Sarah that these were ordained matters, but a little patience is needed. Bittersweet, the beautiful farmer family home in Elliott, had burned down in 1904 while Sarah was away, and all of Sarah's papers and her father's invention papers, designs, and models were tragically destroyed. But during this time, Abdu'l-Baha wrote letters to her of hope and inspiration. He told her that opposition will wax fierce and people will arise to oppression, but that she should not be discouraged or grieved. He promised her that opposition shall surely pass away. At that time, your value shall appear among the nations of the world, and tribes and people will arise to praise you. At Sarah's funeral, Kate Ives said, Abdu'l-Baha said that Miss Farmer's love would put new life into stone. And Alfred Lowe said, Miss Farmer was a noble woman, known all over the world. In far Asia, Sarah Farmer's name is spoken with the utmost reverence. Her influence and memory will always dwell in our hearts. And many had written in her autograph books. I'm just going to include one of these. It says, to the immortal Sarah J. Farmer, Saint Sarah of the future, founder of Greenacre, by Horace Fletcher, flushed with the happiness of the harmony of Greenacre. There are many, many tributes that, of course, I don't have time to share. So now we get to the second, and this slide shows perhaps the greatest tribute of all from the master himself, who revealed a prayer for Sarah Farmer, which is in the Greenacre book. So now we get to the second chapter of the history of Greenacre, again, terribly truncated. So in 1913, when Sarah was still incarcerated in the sanatorium, the Greenacre bylaws were amended, and Harry Randall was appointed a trustee, but some opposed the reorganization, feeling it was an attempt to seize control and establish a Baha'i institution. The New York and Boston presses gave the debate banner headlines, photographs, and interviews. Many Elliott residents who had observed or participated in Greenacre's development and vicissitudes took a lively interest and joined the Greenacre Fellowship and voted with the Baha'is. In 1915, there were reports that Sarah was being held against her will. One attempt to rescue her was unsuccessful. According to Carrie Kenny, during her visit to Greenacre, Abdu'l-Baha had said to her that what Miss Farmer had was not insanity, but exaltation. He had also said, Sarah Farmer must be gotten out of that place, but you must do it in a legal way. In August 1916, a warrant was issued by the Portsmouth Chief of Police, and a formidable party arrived at the sanatorium to achieve her release, which was successful. In November that year, Sarah died, having had her final months in her own home. During the next financially troubled decade, Harry Randall became administrator and served on the Greenacre Board of Trustees until he passed away in 1929. In 1925, the court case, 100th year, regarding Greenacre was settled in favor of the Baha'is. Now, this is when I first went to Greenacre. Oh, just kidding. Okay, 1925. Now, why is that date significant to us now? A century later, we are celebrating the establishment of the first National Spiritual Assembly of the Baha'is of the U.S. and Canada. So according to Catherine Hogenson, the NSA was first elected in 1922, but Shoghi Effendi and God Passes By lists 1925 as the year it began. So that year in July, the National Convention was held at Green Acre. So we could say that the NSA was established at Green Acre rather than at the Auditorium Hotel in downtown Chicago. We don't know why the Guardian used 1925, except that between 1922 and 1925, the voting list was refined, and also that year delegates could vote absentee, making it more inclusive. The convention was held at Green Acre, an inconvenient location for some, but because the faith had finally jumped through the legal hurdles and owned it, it was a celebration of that event. And Kathy points out that many of the participants here are women and that there's also great diversity, ethnically, socially, and racially. The 70th annual convention was held at Green Acre during the first week of July, and a resolution of the convention proposed placing control of the school under the jurisdiction of the NSA. It was joyfully accepted. Green Acre came under the NSA in 1926, and its legal title was transferred in 1929. For years, the NSA usually met at Green Acre once during the summer. It allowed them a longer meeting, and they did not have to worry about Louis Gregory and Fred Schaflacher, who was a Jew, being welcome. Canada established its own separate NSA in 1948. So during the 1925 convention, the distinguished Canadian architect William Sutherland Maxwell served as a cook that summer, and his daughter Mary was there, age 14. You can see in the picture. That summer, a World Unity Conference was held relating to peace, unity, and fellowship. In December, the first campaign of unified action was initiated. In 1925, the first Elliott Spiritual Locals Assembly was also elected, and its members were closely associated with Green Acre, and there's a few extra people in the picture. From 1927 on, there were conferences on race unity, and Shoghi Effendi approved a plan for Green Acres becoming a center for race amity. This is from 1929. Over the years, many people felt moved to express Green Acres' spirit in prose and poetry. Horace Hawley, then Secretary of the National Spiritual Assembly, described Sarah Farmer, described Green Acre as one of the most significant expressions of practical idealism ever taking place in this country. He related the aims of Sarah Farmer to the transcendentalist ideals of Emerson, Thoreau, and others, and said, Green Acre is one of the most, I've read that already. I'm sorry, I got a little ahead of myself. Okay, Louis Gregory wrote about Green Acre in a similar vein. Here, idealists meet and strive to combine recreation with knowledge, rest with service, change with system, freedom with devotion, activity with service. The fame of the spot has spread around the world. Literature, art, science, statecraft, education, commerce, and religion have been its patrons. But its greatest treasure is the hearts of those who have humbly served, making others happy through their warmth and glow. Green Acre has a message for those who seek the treasures of God concealed in man. And just as a note, currently Green Acre has launched a Service Avenue program inspired by this quote of Louis Gregory, and also inspired by the needs at Green Acre. Okay, Siegfried Schaflacher, a wealthy Canadian businessman who generously assisted Green Acre, affirmed, when I first came here, I was presented with a little booklet which told of the ideals of this center, and I said, is it possible? I came to the conclusion that it was not the outer Green Acre, even with its beautiful setting and surroundings, but that it was the deep meaning of Green Acre, its ideals, its universal platform, its deep spiritual significance, its standards of unity and human solidarity that I so loved much, and which I've tried to follow, which many succeed in following, and all of us will succeed in the endeavor through cooperation and selfless service. And it will be our privilege to lift others up and see that they also enjoy this happiness and the loving fellowships friendships, the demonstration of the spirit of love in action. In 1933, the national focus of the Baha'i community had become the building of the House of Worship in Wilmette, Illinois, and funds were urgently needed. In an announcement in Baha'i News, it was noted that at Greenacre, tea is to be served daily, to be temple teas, there being no charge made but a silver collection taken for the temple fund. The educational offerings continued with courses by many well-known Baha'is. The 1930s saw many changes at Greenacre under the direction of Dr. Genevieve Coy. The lecture format for classes was changed to a more formal study class with emphasis on training and inspiring Baha'i teachers. Many pageants were held, utilizing drama and music as educational tools. June Romagnanti, the daughter of Curtis and Harriet Kelsey, recalls those days. My parents made many sacrifices to give us the privilege of spending the summer in the atmosphere of Greenacre. Greenacre is a little taste of the next world. The Guardian called Greenacre the most important institution of its kind in the world. And in 1938, he wrote a significant message to the North American Baha'is, which referred to the importance of those initial Baha'i schools, which as time goes by will evolve into powerful centers of Baha'i learning. In 1941, Greenacre was renamed Greenacre Baha'i School, which gave it a clearer description of identity. Bahia Randall Ford, later Winkler, and Harry Ford served as hosts at Greenacre for a number of years. Polly Marlowe remembered that Bahia was a charming hostess. She seemed greatly to resemble Sarah Farmer, and we felt she brought the spirit of Sarah Farmer to Greenacre. During this time, Bahia conducted extensive research on the life of Sarah Farmer, gathering reminiscences, photographs, and mementos of her life, and establishing the Sarah Farmer papers at the National Baha'i Archives, all of which have been the basis for subsequent research. And last year, I was able to collaborate with Bahia in publishing her research, of course, across time and space. Mildred Mataheta became a close friend of Bahia's and an ardent supporter of Greenacre. According to Mildred, she arrived one summer under doctor's orders to rest as she was recovering from pneumonia, but found herself running Greenacre with Bahia. As soon as I realized the needs of Greenacre, I went right into the kitchen and began cooking, recalls Mildred. After that, Bahia was responsible for the housekeeping and I for the kitchen. We both put work in on the program. We did everything in those days. Mildred and Bahia were reunited at Greenacre during the summer of Mildred's 80th birthday when Bahia came to Greenacre from South Africa after an absence of 35 years. The two shared a platform at Baha'i Hall, recalling many details of those early years. I was there. I must skip over now some decades of important history and deal with the recent past and present. So in my lifetime, my most significant time at Greenacre, but I haven't been there often, was the centenary celebration in 2005 of the Portsmouth Peace Treaty. During a 2-year period under the leadership of Jim and Janine Sacco, I went to Greenacre multiple times, sometimes staying for weeks to participate in programs, exhibits, and performances related to an observance that the entire seacoast area of Maine and New Hampshire were celebrating. I got to portray Sarah Farmer in the New Hampshire Chautauqua program, meet the Japanese ambassador, write and publish, and experience an astonishing outreach that I had never known in the faith before. Okay, I'm going to hold myself back from telling you more about that. So this spirit of inclusivity and de-emphasizing the division between Baha'i society and its aims and those of the broader world have since been fostered and amplified at Greenacre. Last year, when I went back with several friends from Texas, one of them was not a Baha'i and didn't really know much about the faith. They were astonished by the friendliness, warmth, genuineness, and depth of conversation and learning they found there. I was so happy to experience the leadership of Robert Sapiro, Beth Tenner, and Frank Robinson, who together led conscious raising activities and sessions. And so these are just a few pictures of our time there. home visits, meaningful programs, visiting children's classes, Louis Gregory Grave, Sarah Farmer Grave, and the library. Okay, at one point, the name changed from Greenacre Baha'i School to Greenacre, a Baha'i Center of Learning, with more emphasis, I think, on the fact we are all learning new ways in the arena of social change and transformation. And a descriptive term on the website says an immersive learning environment. So the next series of slides depicts an astonishing collection. This is also from the website. There's many arts related. Oh, I could talk about this for a long time, but I won't. The next series of slides depicts an astonishing collection of photos by Glenn Egley documenting many events held at Greenacre over the last few years. And they will make you jealous and me as well, and yearn to be there. But Robert Shapiro, the current director, has shared with me some of the current aspects of emphasis at Greenacre, including the importance of creating an attractive environment for inclusion of all kinds, for combining community building and the institute process with meaningful conversations that address the big questions of our day, for discourse that relates to the world and weaves in Baha'i concepts without always explicitly teaching the faith, for planning a winter school based on family and marriage, creating lively youth and children-centered spaces. And he gave one example of youth coming up from the Mission Park neighborhood in Boston. Oh, that's not the right slide, but anyway, mostly African American, Latino, and Chinese, and how diversity is more and more common. Here's that slide. Okay. And there's also the Institute for Global Prosperity, which now occurs every summer for college students, cutting-edge arts development and inclusion, exhibits, performances, film screenings, an annual conference called Sea Change, which engenders transformation through the arts. So I can't do justice to his description of all the activities there now, but all of us should go there and experience these things for ourselves. Robert says they are aware of creating conditions for the temple to be built sometime in the future and doing some thinking about what a university there might look like. But there's plenty to focus on in the meantime. Today, Greenacre Baha'i Center of Learning is a thriving entity built upon a foundation inspired by Sarah's vision and many years of subsequent development. So if we compare the earliest classes at Greenacre to what is going on there now, the development is astonishing and the future is bright. In conclusion, I realize I can't adequately convey the significance of Greenacre as a center of Baha'i learning, as its significance goes far beyond what any individual, particularly now as opposed to, say, several centuries hence, can imagine or perceive. I would just like to be known as Anne of Greenacre and do my best to foster, even from afar, awareness of what the Master called the Acre of the Western world. So perhaps it's fitting I end with some of his words. So Harry Randall explained that Abdu'l-Baha urged him to assist Greenacre. When I was in Haifa in 1919, Abdu'l-Baha talked to me about Greenacre and requested that I do all I could to keep the foundation of Greenacre a living issue, because he told me that someday Greenacre would be the Acre of America and would be the greatest spiritual center in America for the gathering of all peoples. And to us, he says, I desire to make manifest among the friends in America a new light, that they may become a new people. When you go to Greenacre, you must have infinite love for each other. I want you to be happy in Greenacre, to laugh, smile, and rejoice in order that others may be made happy by you. I will pray for you. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you so much, Anne. What a marvelous presentation. Quite a summary. What are you saying?
Thank you. I did it quickly because I didn't want to take too much time.
Well, you did a good job. I'll turn it over now to Gisu, and she can supervise some questions and answers as they arrive. So Gisu.
Thank you so much, Anne. So wonderful to see you and to hear this incredible presentation about Greenacre. And we're celebrating the 125th anniversary of Greenacre becoming a center of Baha'i learning, and really Sarah Farmer dedicating the programs to opening it up to the Baha'is. Can you tell us a little bit about that early time when she had first returned from the Holy Land and from meeting Abdul Baha, and how she started the Baha'i programs at Greenacre?
That's an excellent question, because Sarah Farmer had been known as someone open to all persuasions. And after she got back from Acre, she was filled with the presence of Abdul Baha and the revelation. And Mirza Abu Fazl also came to Greenacre for 4 years during the summers to help her teach classes on the Persian revelation. Now, at the same time, there were other things going on, and some people were attracted to these classes and others were not. They felt that Sarah had become sectarian. In other words, she had chosen one faith over the others. But Sarah explained how the faith was like a rock, and that it encompassed all of the various religions and philosophies. And so she did not see it as a narrowing choice, but many others did. And sometimes there were factions. You know, the society people wanted Greenacre to be theirs. The artists wanted to, of course, take over Greenacre, as we still do. And the Transcendentalists wanted Greenacre to be their platform. They wanted to move their center from Concord to Greenacre. All of these people were struggling for gaining leadership, and Sarah, as a single woman at that time, was also not always respected as the helm of Greenacre. I mean, anyway. So eventually, because her health was poor, she was placed in this sanatorium and removed from Greenacre. So Greenacre continued to evolve and Baha'is continued to be active, but it wasn't until 1925 when the court cases settled down and the Baha'is essentially won. It must have been very dramatic. Was that good?
Thank you. Robert Sapiro, the director of Greenacre that you mentioned, has written in the chat, "Thank you so much for sharing all of this wonderful history and helping us to catch a glimpse of the depth and breadth of Greenacre." He goes on to say, "Sadly and happily, I have to go to attend to a wonderful program happening here at Greenacre in 20 minutes.
Well, Robert is doing a wonderful job in leading Greenacre. You know, he's an actor and a comedian, and he has a great stage presence, but also a warm heart that's very inclusive. So I'm just so happy with what's happening there now and the spirit that is being engendered by all the staff, but particularly Robert.
Thank you so much, Anne. Robert Stockman, do you have a question for Anne?
Well, I've been thinking about exactly this sort of presentation that she's been giving, and I'm struck by the sort of evolution of the way the the Baha'i faith gradually becomes more and more central to Greenacre. Do you want to say a little bit more about some of the other teachers who were there in the early days, like Vivekananda and Dharmapala, and for that matter, Mirza Abul Fazl? It seems to me they were quite a lively presence in the early days. And you might also want to say a little something more about Abdul Baha's visit.
Yes, thank you. Of course, that needs a whole week-long seminar. But if you can picture Elliott, a small town in Maine, kind of conservative town across the bridge from Portsmouth, New Hampshire, and these people from different traditions arriving with turbans and long robes. And it was an astonishing sight to many people who were surprised at all these visitors coming to this property. And Vivekananda had a great sense of humor, and he talked about the wealthy people staying up in the inn, whereas he stayed in the tent village, which was down below the inn. And one night there was a storm, and he said the furniture was dancing and the tents were flapping, and but we felt the God presence down here in the tents. And to this day, followers of Vivekananda come and visit Greenacre because he has become such a known person and figure. At any rate, there's a lot to be discovered about him and his presence there. Apparently, the first yoga class was taught at Greenacre when he was there. And Dharmapala, I don't know that much about, but there were other Eastern sages, and particularly the Mirza Abul Fazl, who was considered one of the most learned of Baha'i scholars, came to Greenacre 4 summers. That must have been astonishing to have that East-West collaboration with Sarah and the knowledge he brought of the Persian revelation. Abdul Baha's visit for a whole week was amazing, and he underlined the need to cast off superstitions and to embrace reality, to investigate reality. And he spoke in the Ireneum, which is a building, and the inn, and he gave a unity feast. And Sarah, when he brought Sarah over, she hadn't been there for a while. I think he brought her over twice, and that must have been very precious. But there are accounts of what that was like to see them together. And he spoke a lot, so there's a lot of talks he gave on numerous subjects. And again, this is a whole subject that should be explored as we look at Abdul Baha's travels and the significance of his bringing to the West the purest and finest explanation of the Baha'i teachings. Truly, he was an example and an ambassador for his father, the Prophet Baha'u'llah. And so we have these marvelous stories about how he welcomed people, like Fred Mortensen, who came. He was poor and he had been in prison, and he was released from prison, and he came to Greenacre because he wanted to meet Abdul Baha, and he rode the rails under the train to get there, and he arrived all covered with soot, and he came into the group of society people who were looking at him, strangely, and he thought, well, he wouldn't be called to meet the master till the very end. But just then, his name was called, and Abdul Baha wanted to see Fred. And when he went up to the room where Abdul Baha stayed and looked into the master's eyes, he found acceptance. And Abdul Baha even kissed his dirty hat and took him under his wing. And when Abdul Baha left Greenacre to go to Malden, Massachusetts, he took Fred Mortensen with him. So Abdul Baha was one who cast away these social divisions and the racial divisions, and he extolled the harmony of men and women, the equality of men and women. But he often told the women patience was needed in the evolution of this regard, of balancing the two wings of the genders. So I don't know what else I can say except that there's many things to look into regarding his visit.
I'm always struck by how incredibly warm Abdu'l-Baha was with Sarah Farmer. And you read one of the letters where he uses references to electricity and wires and grounding to talk to her, and it just shows how well he understood her and her past and honored her father's work in writing that letter in that gorgeous way. We have a question from Frederic Autre. I'm sure I'm mispronouncing. He writes, I discovered that Edith Tewksbury Jackson was a near friend of Sarah Farmer when I worked in the American Baha'i Archives in Wilmette. Did you get some more further information about their friendship and when it began?
Well, thank you, Frederick, for that wonderful question. And Frederick is a dear friend of ours who's a great researcher in France. And he was our guide in Paris when we made the film Abdu'l-Baha in France, and took us all around and had all these notes about what had happened when. But I have to say, I haven't pursued that. So it may be up to you, Frederick, to do that and to send me more information about that, because there's a lot I don't know. For example, W.B. Du Bois was at Greenacre. We don't know much about his visits. I think his wife may have been a Baha'i, but people need to go into the archives of others to find out more about their relationship to Greenacre. So thank you, Frederick. Wish I could help here.
Thank you. Rob?
I've got another question for Anne also. You mentioned that Sarah Farmer was in a sanatorium in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. I gather Abdu'l-Baha was able to go over there and get her out temporarily to take her back to Greenacre, but then she had to go back to the sanatorium. So she remained in that sanatorium for a few more years. Is that right?
That's right. And because Dr. Cowles, who was a famous psychiatrist who was keeping her there, he didn't want to let her go because she was a famous person. So it made him famous to have her there. And he was suspicious of Abdu'l-Baha, so he went to Greenacre with them. But yes, there was an attempt to kidnap Greenacre from the sanatorium, which did not work. That was in 1915. But then in 1916, they got the police involved and everything. And so a whole group of people went over and got her out and carried her down the steps. And she was very happy to leave. And they raced over the state line, through the toll bridge or whatever.
Without toll, if I remember right.
The what now?
They didn't pay the toll, if I remember right.
They didn't pay the toll. They were just racing over to get across the bridge into Maine. And then she went to her home and was carried up the stairs, and she saw her father's picture, and she was so happy to be back. And then the next morning she had breakfast on her own china. And so that was just a few months before she died in November. And she's buried behind that house. The house is not Baha'i owned right now, but you can get permission to go back and see the grave. But I had to scrape away the plants on top of the grave to see it, the marker, and pass the gazebo that Abdu'l-Baha spoke at, which is falling into the earth there. It's not being restored. So there are aspects there that I hope will be remedied in the future.
That's interesting. That's very interesting. It's and quite a sad thing. So you said the Baha'is don't own that house, but Baha'is have rented it, I guess, before, or lived in it at different times.
Well, a relative of some of the Baha'is does own it, and he is responsive when Baha'is, but we can't just go back there,
Sure.
We need to ask permission.
Speaking of the geography of the area, you mentioned that Abdu'l-Baha had said that Greenacre was going to be the Acre was like Acre. When he was in Dublin, New Hampshire, he said that Dublin was like Haifa. So that arc is one that I'm certainly very excited to see develop, and I'm sure everyone else is as well. We have a comment from Ronnie Tamanio, who says that this brings back memories of my teachers Stanwood Cobb, Charles Ragg, Mr. Khadem, and Mr. Furitan.
Well, yes, and I remember Stanwood Cobb going over to his house and having him read our poems, and he used to swim in the river. We did too, till it was considered too dangerous with currents. But that was a wonderful part of Baha'i history. I mean, many people, Mr. Furitan, many hands of the Cobbs have visited Greenacre, and many wonderful things have happened. It's hard to believe it. And going back to that idea of Sarah Farmer imbuing a sense of the presence of Abdu'l-Baha. Last night, Jonathan Menon sent me this article about a newspaper reporter who had gone in with kind of a skeptical mind and then completely been brought to a state of exaltation, he used that word, through talking to Sarah Farmer. This was after her time at the sanatorium. So she must have maintained that spirit all during those dark days. And for this, I really think she is a saint, a hero, a martyr, someone very important to the Baha'i history and to American history. And so I just wanted to share that because I read that last night. And he said even the cameraman felt a sense of presence. Mm-hmm. You know, they couldn't exactly identify or define it, but they were moved and almost shaken by the sense she carried with her of this spiritual royalty.
I think probably should wrap up. Had quite a few questions, and I want to thank our questioners and, of course, thank Anne as well for her marvelous presentation. Thank you, Gisu, for your role. I should mention some things that are coming up through the webinars. And well, maybe first I should ask Gisu to mention the upcoming book club selection so that we remind our audience of that.
Thank you so much. Our book club is reading A Day for Very Great Things. It's the history of Howard Colby Ives and his wife, Mabel. And you remember, of course, that he has written, Howard Colby Ives wrote that marvelous recollection of meeting Abdu'l-Baha in New York and in New Hampshire. And it's just a fantastic book. And their personal history is so interesting. So our book club is reading that this month, and we're meeting on November 23rd. So please join the book club and hope to see you there.
Yeah, it's been on the early side this year because of the way Sundays work, I'm afraid. To mention some upcoming webinars, we have on December 7th, Paul Hanley will be talking about Adasiya, Abdu'l-Baha pioneering regenerative agriculture and rural development. This is the village that Abdu'l-Baha founded in the Jordan River Valley, and he was able to settle dozens or perhaps as many as 100 Persian Baha'i farmers there. And he developed their entire agricultural system. And they were, of course, the source of the wheat that he used to keep people from starving during World War I. So that's going to be December 7th. A week later, December 14th, Najati Al-Khan will be talking about 150 years of the secret of divine civilization. And that should be quite an interesting presentation. Then after the holiday season, on January 11th, Janice Ndegwa will be talking about the Africa Plan, 1950 to 1953, a vital precursor to the 10-year crusade. So it'll be quite interesting to see how the Guardian's sort of international 4-year plan for Africa was a precursor for the international 10-year crusade for spreading the faith worldwide. So that's what's coming up. That's it today from the Corinne True Center for Baha'i History. We want to thank everyone for joining us today, and goodbye until we see you again.